For our Old Testament reading, we heard a passage from Genesis. It talks about God planting the Garden of Eden. And it talks about God taking Adam, the man he had made, and putting him in the Garden of Eden. And then it says that God put Adam there for a reason. It said God put him there to tend it and keep it. Now literally from the Greek that is to cultivate and serve it. And so Adam was put in the Garden of Eden to cultivate and serve it. In other words, Adam was to be the keeper of the Garden of Eden. Now in Genesis chapter 1, we can hear God telling Adam and Eve this. Be fruitful and multiply. Fill the earth and subdue it. Have dominion over the fish of the sea, over the birds of the air, and over every living thing that moves on the earth. And notice the action words in there. Fill, subdue, have dominion. You see, human beings were created to do things. And human beings were created with a desire to do things. We were made with a desire to create. A desire to take the raw materials we find around us and make something. A desire to fashion something from the things in the world. You know, Adam and Eve were not made just to exist. They were not made to lay there motionless like blobs with their hearts beating and the metabolic processes of their bodies going on. That might be the biological definition of life, but that's not real life. True life consists of much more. Adam and Eve were made with a drive to do something. They were made with a drive to create. We were made with a drive to do. That's just how we're made. We're made with a drive to make a mark on the world, to make a difference, to do something, to create. There is something from the way we are made that gives us those desires. And those desires create in us a willingness to put forth effort, a willingness to prevail, a reluctance to give up. It is the spirit of perseverance. We're not willing to give up and just lay there motionless like a blob, just with our body continuing but not doing anything. We have the desire to make a mark, to do something. Along with that, it also indicates a desire to sacrifice. Remember that Adam was told to cultivate and serve the garden. That means that he was to give something of himself to the garden. And so we were made with the spirit of sacrifice. We were made to see beyond ourselves, to step back and look at the big picture, to care about other people and other things, to care about things beyond ourselves. Now you can see the spirit of sacrifice in many ways. If you had children, of course you know what you had to sacrifice to raise your children. You had to sacrifice doing a lot of things that you maybe would have liked to have done in order to raise your children. If you have grandchildren, you sacrifice to do things for your grandchildren and do things with your grandchildren. We call upon our military to sacrifice for the country. Some of the greatest people in history are known as great because of their willingness to sacrifice. The same is true of the greatest people in the Bible. Think of Moses, for example. Moses apparently had a pretty good life until God told him to lead the Hebrews out of Egypt. And then he spent 40 years wandering around in the wilderness. So Moses sacrificed the life he had in order to do what God told him to do. Look at the Apostle Paul. From all indications in the New Testament, the Apostle Paul had a fairly good and comfortable life. And he sacrificed all of that just to go around spreading the message of Jesus. And that eventually cost him his life. In the Gospels, the Apostle Peter says to Jesus, "We have left all and followed you." Now in Matthew chapter 4, we see Jesus calling some disciples. It says this: Jesus, walking by the Sea of Galilee, saw two brothers, Simon Peter and Andrew his brother, casting a net into the sea, for they were fishermen. Jesus said to them, "Follow me, and I will make you fishers of men." They immediately left their nets and followed him. Going on from there, he saw two other brothers, James the son of Zebedee and John. They were in the boat with Zebedee their father, mending the nets. Jesus called them, and immediately they left the boat and their father and followed him. You see, the willingness to do one thing necessarily means the willingness to sacrifice doing something else. You cannot do this and that at the same time. When you decide to go this direction, it necessarily means that you sacrifice going in this direction. And so we were made with that willingness to sacrifice, because every decision we make involves sacrificing alternate decisions. So our spirit of sacrifice, combined with our spirit of wanting to do things and wanting to create things, has led us to create many things. It has led to creation in fields we normally associate with creativity, like art, music, and literature, but it has led to creation in many other things. Just think of the things human beings have created on the earth. We've created a civilization here. Houses, agriculture, central heat and air, kitchens, bathrooms, TV, airplanes, cars, all kinds of things. Now this creative spirit is a result of perseverance. It is a result of a spirit that wants to prevail, that doesn't want to give up. It is a result of the willingness to sacrifice, and it has led us to create the life we now have. If you stood outside of this building 300 years ago, you would have seen nothing but a forest. But today, look what's out there. There's a whole civilization out there. It's all there because human beings created it. And we did that because we have the drive to do things like that. We're made with that drive. We're made with the drive to create, to take what's around us and make something. And that goes back to what God told Adam and Eve. Be fruitful and multiply. Fill the earth and subdue it. But the spirit of sacrifice and the desire to create has also led to something else. It has led to the willingness to cooperate. And when you think about it, you have to be willing to sacrifice in order to cooperate. Because when you cooperate with others, you have to be willing to bend and give up a little of what you want. You see, it was this spirit of willingness to cooperate that has led to the highest achievements of human beings. Left to ourselves, none of us could have created civilization on our own. None of us could have created the life we now enjoy. I could not have created cars and interstate highways by myself. I may have been able to build some kind of shelter for myself to live in, but I could not have built an insulated home with central heat and air, electricity, indoor plumbing, a washer and dryer, and a vacuum cleaner. I could maybe have made some kind of crude bed for Wanda and I to sleep on, but it wouldn't have been nothing like we sleep on now. And I could not have made a set of sheets on my own. I just couldn't have done it. You see, it takes cooperation, a willingness to give and to bend a little bit in order to have the life we have today. The achievements that human beings have made on the earth, and there have been many, they are due to the abilities God created us with. God created us with the drive to do things, the drive to create, the drive to make our mark on the world, the drive to make a difference, the drive to press on and not give up, the willingness to sacrifice and the willingness to cooperate with others. Those are the qualities God gave us when He made us. And those are the qualities that have enabled us to have the life we now enjoy. But there's something that needs to go along with that. Early on in Genesis, when God first creates human beings, it says that God created human beings in His own image. There's always been disagreement within Christianity about what that means, but as best as I can tell after hearing so many things over the years is, I think it means that we were created to reflect God. To reflect God. And really what that means is that we were made to be like God, and we were made in a very real sense to bring God into the world. And so all of our creative energies, all of our perseverance, all of our will to do, all of our drive to make a mark, all of our willingness to sacrifice and cooperate, all of that should be directed to one goal: reflecting God in the world. That should be the guiding force with which we live our lives. We need to reflect God in the world. Jesus said, "You are the light of the world." Jesus said, "You are like a city set on a hill." Jesus said, "Let your light so shine before men that they may see your good works and glorify your Father in heaven." We are to reflect God in the world. And that is our highest calling as Christians. In Exodus chapter 20, we find the 10 Commandments. The second commandment goes like this: "You shall not make for yourself a carved image, any likeness of anything that is in heaven above, or that is in the earth beneath, or that is in the water under the earth. You shall not bow down to them nor serve them." Now, obviously, we don't take that one seriously. Okay, then God goes on to say, "For I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God, visiting the iniquity of the fathers upon the children to the third and fourth generations of those who hate me, but showing mercy to thousands to those who love me and keep my commandments." Now that showing mercy to thousands who love me and keep my commandments is usually been interpreted by most Christians as thousands of people who love God. But in many Jewish circles, it's interpreted differently. If you'll notice, it says, "For I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God, visiting the iniquity of the fathers upon the children to the third and fourth generations of those who love me, but showing mercy to thousands." And so the Jewish interpretation is that thousands refers to not thousands of people, but thousands of generations of people. And the way that is interpreted, it is to mean that God weighs good as counting more than evil. In other words, a little good cancels out a lot of evil. You see, God remembers evil for 3 or 4 generations, but He remembers good for thousands of generations. Evil is soon forgotten, but good endures for ages. I was talking to a man a while back. He knows he is coming to the end of his life. And he said, "You know, I've done a lot of things in my life I regret, and I've made a lot of mistakes." And then he said, "But I've also done good things. And I hope the good things I've done sort of help make up for the bad things I've done." And you know, I couldn't help but think of that, Exodus 20, about how the Jewish interpretation goes that a little good cancels out a lot of bad. We heard that from Proverbs today. Hatred stirs up conflict, but love covers over all sins. The same idea is in the book of 1 Peter. Above all things, have fervent love for one another, for love will cover a multitude of sins. A little good covers up and cancels out a lot of evil. Now, earlier we talked about the human drive to create, to make things and make a mark on the world. We may think of that first of all in terms of physical things like interstate highways and airplanes and buildings and things like that. But we not only make things like that, we also transmit information. And that information is what's called culture. Culture is the way of life of a people, their history, their traditions, beliefs, and values. And one of the things we create that is not a physical thing is our heritage. And then we pass our heritage on to our children, on to the next generation, or at least we should. And that then becomes the foundation for the world they will live in. The new generations do not come from nothing. The new generations do not inherit a blank slate. They come from a heritage that extends back into the past. Every baby that's born inherits not only the past of its family, but also the past of its society and the world. Every baby that's born inherits a culture with a history, traditions, beliefs, and values. And the new generations, whether they realize it or not, or whether they like it or not, do indeed stand on the shoulders of those who came before them. And they do indeed walk on ground that was prepared for them by those who came before them. Wanda likes to watch the TV show Alone. It comes on the History Channel a couple of times a year, and it doesn't stay on very long. It's just a few weeks. In that show, individuals are dropped off in some wilderness somewhere, and each individual is by themselves, and they have to try to survive on their own. That's what the new generations would be like if they did not have the past. When a baby is born, it is born into a civilization, a society that has already been made. It's not just out in the wilderness to fend for itself. A whole society, a whole civilization is there, already in place. That's how the new generations stand on the shoulders of those who came before them and walk on the ground that was prepared for them by those who came before them. Sometimes we look back on the past and we look back on our heritage and we see things that happen with which we are uncomfortable, things we don't like, things we think should not have happened. We stand on the shoulders of those who came before us and we don't like what they did. We don't like the way they made society. We walk on roads built by those who came before us and we don't like the way they made the road. We look back on the people. It seems like they made so many mistakes. We're tempted to throw them out, distance ourselves from them. But is that really what we should do? I remember going to Dresden, Germany not long after the Berlin Wall fell and the country of Germany was reunited into one. You could see places where the statues of the old communist leaders had been removed. You could see where many of the old buildings were being torn down and replaced by new buildings. You could see where the coal soot was being scrubbed off of buildings. In communist times, all they had to eat with was coal. And if you went to Dresden right after the wall fell, all the buildings were just, they always looked black with coal soot. Everything was black with coal soot. But everything was being modernized and cleaned up and updated. And it was good. But I remember being in the old Dresden train station. It was old and somewhat decrepit. I imagine it wasn't much different than it was when it was built in the late 1940s. It was a really neat place, like being transported back in time to another era. And one evening when I was there, I was changing trains and I had to wait a while on another one. I was walking around in that train station. It wasn't all that big back then. And I noticed a door. And it was open a little partial. It was double doors like that. And I pushed it up and looked. It was an old storeroom. And it had old stuff in there. Like those old scales, you know, that you used to stand on and put the coin in and it would give you a weight. And it had a bunch of old stuff in there. And I went in there and looked at that stuff. It was like being transported back to another era. And several years later, I went back to Dresden. The old train station was gone. It had been replaced by a brand new building. Perfect building. Super nice. But I thought it was a loss. I liked that old building. There was something neat about it. And Dresden just didn't look the same after they had scrubbed all that coal soot off all the building. It never was the same. You see, rejecting all that came before us and attempting to erase and reject the past is a result of misinterpretation of the way things were. We do, in fact, stand on the shoulders of those who came before us. We do, in fact, walk on the roads they prepared for us, whether we like it or not. If not for those who came before us, we would be like those contestants on the show alone, plopped down in the middle of the woods to fend for ourselves. Now let's go back and think about what we talked about earlier. Remember that we Christians are supposed to reflect God in the world. We're supposed to be a light shining in the darkness of the world. We're supposed to be a city set on a hill. We're supposed to be doing things and living our lives in such a way that people will see it and glorify God. In order to do that, we have to leave society behind. Even though we have stood on the shoulders of society and walked down the road society has prepared for us, there comes a point where we have to distance ourselves. And we have to stop thinking about what society has done or is doing. We need to go back to the model of Christianity that we find in the New Testament. And there we find the Christianity that is about you as an individual. It is not about society. It is about individuals. We do not see in the New Testament concern about what society is doing. We only see concern about what individuals do. All the talk in the New Testament about reflecting God in the world, about being the light of the world, about being a city set on a hill, is directed to individuals. It is not directed to society. There is much in the New Testament that talks about individuals becoming Christian, but there is nothing in the New Testament that talks about society becoming Christian. In fact, just the opposite. The New Testament sees society as moving further and further away from God, and it never tells us there's anything we can do about it. It never even tells us we should try to do anything about it. The way the New Testament sees it is that only God can do something about it. And one day God will. That means that we as Christians will always be at odds with society. And as time goes on, we will find ourselves becoming more and more at odds with society. And so what we worry about is how we ourselves, as individuals, reflect God in the world. We let society go its own way. We know God will eventually deal with that. But when we say we know God will eventually deal with that, we don't do it judgmentally, even though that might be so tempting. Although we will always be at odds with society, we shouldn't be too hard on society because, after all, we do in fact stand on the shoulders of society, and we do in fact walk down roads society has prepared on us. We do owe much to society. when we look out in society and see so much bad, see so many things going wrong and getting worse, we do it remembering what the Bible said: a little good covers a lot of wrong. And we hope that the little bit of good we do see in society will cover up the whole lot of wrong that we see in society. And so we're not judgmental. We have good hope that that little bit of good will cover up a lot of wrong. And there is a little bit of good. Rather than just looking at the wrong, then we should look for the right. Rather than just looking at how things are going wrong, we should look at where things are going right. Rather than looking for all bad in someone, maybe we should look for just a little bit of good and hope, just hope, that that little bit of good will cover up a lot of wrong. You are the light of the world. You are a city set on a hill. Let your light so shine before men that they may see your good works and glorify your Father in heaven. That should be the goal of our lives as Christians. I challenge you to use your energy, your drive to do, your unwillingness to give up, your perseverance, your willingness to sacrifice, your willingness to cooperate, and all the drives God gave you. I urge you to commit yourself anew to using all of those to being the light of the world in your own personal life, to make your own personal life the city set on the hill, regardless of what goes on in the world around you.